Hey everybody, and welcome back to my coverage of PogChamps 3. Today we have Game 2 of Tubbo versus Logic. So if you haven't seen Game 1, I'll put it in the card up there. You can check that out and then come back and watch Game 2. This was a really exciting match, so both these games I recommend checking out. So this time we have Tubbo with white, and Tubbo needs to get this win to tie the match and go into an Armageddon game. Logic only needs a draw, and he will get the 3-point he'll get the 3 points for the tournament. So that's what needs to happen, and let's see what happens. So we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, so the Italian game, just like their first game. And here, Logic plays d6, so this is where we deviate from the first game. And Tubbo castles, we have bishop g4, d3, so very classical, logical play from both players so far. And then we have knight d4, which is not the best move. You know, you probably want to be developing pieces that you've not already developed instead of moving pieces that you have already developed. But it is an okay move. And here we have bishop g5, which is kind of a tricky move because it's attacking the queen. But this is actually a huge blunder because of the move bishop takes f3, and this is the classic puzzle rush tactic. So after bishop takes f3, now your queen is attacked. So if you, for example, take this bishop, then you simply lose your bishop because the knight was defending the bishop. So you can't do that. You'll just lose a piece. If you go ahead and try to take black's queen instead, now black takes your queen, and then it doesn't matter if you save your bishop, black saves their bishop, and if you take black's bishop, then black takes your bishop, and you still end up down a piece because you lost this knight on f3. So that was a win that Logic missed early on. Because he did not play bishop takes f3 here. Instead, he played knight f6, but he could have been up a piece with bishop takes f3, so that's just unfortunate that he missed it. So we're going to continue developing. Tubbo plays knight bd2. We have h6, bishop h4, bishop e7, so just continuing development, getting ready to castle. c3, knight takes f3 check, knight takes f3, and Logic castles. We have h3, bishop h5, and d4, and this is a mistake because it simply hangs the e4 pawn here, which Logic takes advantage of. And also, you'll notice that this is a double attack on the bishop on h4, so this queen and bishop battery is attacking this bishop twice. The knight only defends it once, so white has to do something about it. White decides to counterattack with bishop d3, so the idea is if you take the bishop, then I'll get the knight for free. This almost works, but the refutation is really complicated, and so the refutation simply goes bishop takes f3, and then if g takes f3, then you play knight g5 and you've ruined white's kingside. And if, for example, bishop takes e7, then we simply have queen takes e7, queen takes f3, and we have knight d2, which is a fork on the rook and the queen. So it almost works, but Logic is probably not going to be able to see all of that. So instead we have d5. We do not have bishop takes f3, we have d5. And here white plays g4. So once again, counterattacking one of black's pieces. However, now you're just totally opening up your king side. So even if you can maintain material equality, your king is just going to be very unsafe. So this is not looking good for Tubbo, especially because he needs this win. So bishop takes h4, knight takes h4, queen takes h4, and g takes h5. So like I said, we have material equality now, but white's king is just very exposed. The queen and the knight here are going to really give this king some trouble. So we have queen takes h3, d cross e5, and we have knight g5. So kind of have to go back in order to come forward here. We have f4 by Tubbo, and this actually gives Logic the chance to take a draw. So, you know, maybe if Logic was thinking, I only need a draw to win the match, I can now play queen g3, king h1, queen h3, king g1, and just repeat that, and it will be a draw by 3/4 repetition. So he could have taken that, but he is in a winning position right now, so maybe Logic wanted more. Still, we start with queen g3 check, king h1, and now will Logic repeat? The answer is no. He goes for knight h3. And this is actually a blunder, so I think logic here is, the idea is he's going after this f-pawn. Oh, sorry, Tubbo. Logic is going after Tubbo's f-pawn. However, this is actually a blunder because after queen f3, you have to trade queens, otherwise you lose the knight, and now the knight is trapped. So the knight has no free squares, and white's actually going to be up a bishop. So Tubbo could have won here with queen f3. However, he did not see this. He quickly played queen e1 after queen to g3, and not only does this not win the knight, it also hangs your bishop here. So that's what logic played. Logic played queen takes d3, and after rook d1, queen e4 check, so logic's up a piece. He wants to trade down. So after queen e4 check, queen takes e4, d takes e4, you might think that the knight is trapped here with king g2, but black actually has a way to save the knight, and that is e3. And now if white goes ahead and takes this knight, then we have e2, which is forking the two rooks. So I'm not sure if either player saw that, but that resource was available. We'll never know because Tubbo did not play king g2. Instead, he played rook d7. So kind of just activating his rook. You might want to be careful about this passed pawn here, but it looks like for now it's going to be okay. We have e3, rook takes c7 check, so, or not check, but just rook takes c7, picking up a free pawn. Rook f d8, getting on that open file, and now we have king g2. And here, just one simple way to win is you play e2, so now you're attacking this rook. And Tubbo has to play rook e1 here, for example, and now you can simply play rook d1, and if rook takes e2, then you have knight takes f4 check, and you're going to be up a rook here. So you're up a rook as black, you're just going to be completely winning for logic. So that was just one way to win. Knight f2 is also completely fine. But logic did not play either of these moves. After king g2, logic played rook d2, which now this just completely hangs a knight. And there's not going to be any promotion tactics that work out. So maybe logic just miscalculated here, because after king takes h3 and e2, rook e1, black has nothing. So this pawn is going to be stopped, and the king can come over here and help neutralize this threat. So we have rook d3 check, and here it definitely would have been better for Tubbo to bring his king back to g2 to help get rid of this passed pawn, but instead Tubbo plays king g4. We have rook e3, so getting his rook, logic getting his rook behind the passed pawn, very principled, very logical. We have rook d7, rook c8, rook d2, and a5, and now rook d takes e2, so just scooping up that passed pawn. Logic trades a pair of rooks, and now if we look at the material, Tubbo is actually up a pawn. So once again, it's only a pawn, and logic only needs to draw this game to win the match. But maybe logic was regretting not taking that draw earlier. Anyway, we have b5 and b4. A takes b4, c takes b4, and rook a8. We have f5 because this pawn is already defended from the rook. Rook a4 and rook b2, defending everything. King f8, e6, f takes e6, f takes e6, so now white has a passed pawn. Luckily, the king is there to stop it. We have king e7, king f5, rook a8, so looking to get the rook back into the game. Rook a6 was probably a little more accurate here. And king g6, so white is saying, I'll trade my e-pawn for this g7 pawn. But logic does not want to do that trade. He plays rook g8, defending his g-pawn. And now we have a4. So simply rook e2 here is probably the best move. You want to defend this passed pawn. You don't want to lose that. But I guess Tubbo had other plans. He wanted to get this passed pawn on the queen side. However, in doing so, you also let black get this passed a pawn. So maybe it's not the best trade. We have rook a2 and rook a8. Now logic defending his newly made passed pawn. We have b5. Tubbo's pushing his passed pawn, and king takes e6. We have king cross g7, king d8, king cross h6. So now white has this outside passed pawn, but it looks like the rook is going to be able to defend it well enough. King c7, king g6. King g7 probably would have been a little more accurate. hiding behind the king and also defending every single promotion path for this h-pawn. We have king b6 and h6, so Tubbo's just looking to promote this passed pawn, and Logic is looking to pick up this pawn and promote his own passed pawn. So we have king cross b5 and h7. We have rook a6 check, king g7, rook a7 check, king h6, rook a6 check, and king h5. And now the black rook cannot give the white king any more checks. So what you have to do is defend this h8 promotion square. You cannot attack the pawn. You don't have time to attack the pawn because you need to defend this promotion square. However, Logic does not play rook a8. Instead, he plays rook a7. So I guess he thought that the king would have to come back up and defend this pawn, and he could make a draw. However, this is not the correct move because white simply plays h8 equals queen, and now white is up a queen. So this is going to be very winning for white. So now Tubbo is winning. Let's see if Tubbo can convert this position. We have king b4, queen b2 check, king a5, and here a very simple win would have been for Tubbo to play rook takes a4, king takes a4, and queen a2, and picking up the rook, and we would have a king and queen checkmate. So that could have been a very simple win by Tubbo. But instead we have queen e5 check, we have king b4, rook b2 check, king a3, rook b5, so it looks like Tubbo is maybe unsure of how to convert this position, or maybe he's a little low on time, so he's sort of getting in time pressure, but he did have queen c3, mate in 1 here, so I think it was the time that was getting to him. But anyway, we have rook b5, rook h7 check, so Logic is on his last stand. He's just trying to do something. King g4 and rook d7, rook a5, rook b7, queen a1 check, king b4, and now Tubbo finally picks up this pawn with queen takes a4 check. We have king c3, rook c5 check, king d3, and once again we could have had this queen a6 fork picking up the rook, and it would have been a very simple ladder mate, but instead Tubbo plays queen c4 check. We have king e3, rook e5 check, so I think Tubbo is trying to go for the ladder mate, but it's kind of awkward. His queen and rook are not very coordinated, and his king is in the way, and this rook is also sort of interfering from checkmating on the left side of the board. So we have king d2 and queen d4 check, king c2, rook c5 check, king b1, and like I said, this rook is interfering from doing the ladder mate on this side of the board. However, once again, Tubbo missed this queen e4 check. He could have gotten this fork, picked up the rook very easily, and checkmated it only a couple more moves. But instead, Tubbo decides to bring the king into the game. He plays king f3, so I think he's thinking that the king can help deliver checkmate. He can't do it with the queen and the rook, so bring in the king, see if we can do it like that. We have rook b3 check, king e2, rook b2 check, and here, I mean, you can even sack the queen for the rook and do the king and rook checkmate if you know how to do that. But maybe Tubbo did not know how to do that, or he was not confident in being able to do that with only a minute left on the clock. So he plays king d1. We have king a2, rook a5 check, king b3, king c1, and rook c2 check. And here Tubbo makes a huge blunder. He plays king b1. And the reason this is a blunder is because now Logic can play rook c1 check, and this is actually stalemate because after king takes c1, the king guards these two squares, the queen guards these squares, and the rook guards the a file. So the king is in stalemate. So Logic could have made a stalemate after king to b1 with rook to c1 check, and it would have forced a stalemate. But he must have missed this move because instead he played rook b2 check, and this allows white to get out. So in fact, this allows white to now take this rook with queen takes b2 check, and now we're going to see a very simple ladder mate from Tubbo. We don't have to worry about any more black rook. So we have king c4, and let's see how Tubbo finishes this off. Queen b5 check, king d4, queen b4 check, king d3. So if this king were on the other side of the board, this would be a very simple ladder mate like this, there would probably be no problems. We have rook d5 check instead, king e2, queen d4, king f3, rook f5 check, king g3, queen f4 check, king g2, king c3, king c2. So here Tubbo could have played queen g4 check and then brought the rook to the h file, and that would have been a very simple mate into ladder checkmate. But he didn't go for this. Instead, he played king c2. We have king g1, king d2, king g2, king e3. So once again, Tubbo bringing in the king to try to help deliver checkmate. And after king g1, we have king e2, king g2, and queen f2 check. And Logic plays king h3, and here Tubbo has a very nice mate in 2 with rook h5 check and queen f3, kind of a very geometrical checkmate. But instead, Tubbo played king f3, and this is stalemate because the king and queen cut off the king from any escape, and the king is not in check. So Tubbo's stalemates, Logic, each get half a point, so the match ended 1.5 to half in Logic's favor, which means Logic got the 3 tournament points, so he's got a very nice start to the tournament, and we'll have to see where Group C takes us from there. So let me, I think it's right here. Yeah, this is the Group C standings so far, so this is the only match that's been played in Group C. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say in this game. So very long game, over 80 moves, and mistakes from both sides, but it's a learning experience. Chess is all about the learning experience. So hopefully we'll see some better endgame technique from Tubbo in the future, in some of his future games. So we'll just have to see. But I don't think I have anything else to say, so thank you for watching, and be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any more PogChamps 3 updates, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.